Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today,
It
we're going to
has.
be looking at something pretty heavy.
Yeah, for sure.
Assisted dying.
Yeah.
And
Assisted death.
yeah, sometimes called medical assistance in dying or MAID.
Right.
We're going to be looking at this in Canada.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the experiences of a particular doctor who started providing this care in 2016 after it became legal in Canada.
It became legal.
So this is,
Yeah.
a really sensitive topic, I think, for a lot of people.
Huge, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's one of those things that I think we all
Think about
I
it
don't think about it.
at some point in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to
Yeah.
be looking at this
Sure.
in detail and looking at the really human stories involved.
I think what's really interesting about this particular deep dive that we're doing today is we're looking at it through the lens of somebody who was a maternity doctor. Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
Dr. Stephanie Green, her background was in bringing life into the world.
Right.
And so for her to kind of transition into this area of medicine where it's really about
The other end.
the end of life,
Yeah.
it was kind of
Like a 180.
it was a huge shift.
Yeah.
And as you listen today, just pay attention to her sort of initial feelings stepping into this new role.
Yeah. And she uses this phrase, big blind step.
Yeah.
And that, I think, really encapsulates
Absolutely.
kind of the feeling of the unknown that she was going into.
Totally.
So our mission here is to try to understand the practicalities, the emotional weight of this,
Yep.
and also the ethical considerations.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're going to do this
For sure.
by looking closely at the cases
Yep.
that Dr. Green was involved with.
Yeah.
So let's jump in and start with the very first
Um,
assisted death
First case.
that Dr. Green provided. And this is a man named Harvey.
Okay, so Harvey's story starts with a referral, and he's a 74-year-old man,
Okay.
and he's got end-stage liver failure.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor who refers him to Dr. Green actually describes Dr. Green as being courageous
Interesting.
for taking on this role.
Wow.
So that word courageous, I think, is really telling.
Yeah, what does that say about the field at that time?
Yeah, it speaks to an environment where this was a new thing,
Right.
and there may be some unknowns and potentially a little bit of stigma around it.
Okay, so the first time that Dr. Green meets with Harvey,
Yeah.
it's in his home
Uh-huh.
with his wife, Norma.
Okay.
And she really emphasizes that she wanted to be very clear and direct with him from the very beginning.
Yeah, she kind of avoids all of that soft language,
Yeah.
euphemisms, and,
Beating around the bush.
totally.
Yeah.
So she remembers saying to Harvey, we're going to talk about death today, and we're going to talk about dying your death, and we're going to talk about assisted dying.
Wow. That's
So
how-
just right from the get-go,
really laying it out.
laying it all out. No ambiguity.
Straightforward.
Totally. And Harvey's response was, yes, that's exactly what I hoped for. No more bullshit.
Wow.
So he really appreciated that.
Yeah, he was ready for that,
Direct approach.
it sounds like.
Yeah.
So Harvey's reasons for wanting to pursue assisted death were really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that he was afraid of dying.
Yeah.
It was more that he wanted to have control.
Control over how and when.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in his own home with his family.
Yep.
And he really didn't want to
Have a prolonged,
a prolonged suffering and debilitating.
debilitating end.
Indeed.
And he even said, I'd like to have one last bash with my friends and maybe even sneak a sip of a beer.
Wow. So it wasn't about giving up.
Right.
It was about
It's about,
taking control
Yeah.
of the situation.
absolutely. And having his last moments be meaningful
Yeah.
on his term.
And with his loved ones.
Yep.
So to be eligible for assisted death in Canada, there were a few criteria that Harvey had to meet.
Yeah. So he had to be capable of making his own decisions.
Okay.
His request had to be completely voluntary,
Mm-hmm.
and he had to have a grievous and irremediable medical condition.
Okay.
So
good, yeah.
basically a serious and incurable illness.
Yeah.
And he also had to get a second opinion from another doctor.
Okay.
And there was a 10-day reflection period
Okay.
to really make sure
Time.
that this was
I think
what he wanted.
Yeah.
But in Harvey's case, because his condition was deteriorating
Okay.
so quickly,
Yeah.
that reflection period was actually shortened.
I see. So there is some flexibility
Yeah, there has to be.
built into the system.
Right. To account for
You
it.
can't have a hard and fast
Right. People rule.
because everybody's
It's deteriorating rapidly.
circumstances are different.
Yeah. And something else that's pretty remarkable is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Harvey and his wife Norma actually held an open house so he could say goodbye to his friends and neighbors.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So he was really, really facing it head on.
Embracing the end.
Yeah.
And wanted to connect with the people in his life.
Yeah, and have a sense of community around this.
Yeah, and have a good send-off.
Yeah. So then we come to the day of Harvey's death, and Dr. Green talks about this moment where she's actually just trying to decide what to wear. And this sounds kind of silly, but she's really struggling with wanting to be professional but not cold.
Right.
But also
casual but respectful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and it really highlights
that
this was just such uncharted territory.
Absolutely.
I mean, there wasn't a rule book.
Right.
Or
like
a dress code for assisted death.
Not at all.
So
yeah.
Dr. Green arrives at Harvey's home, and she describes it as taking a big blind step. And before the actual procedure, she meets with Harvey privately to just confirm one last time.
Make sure that
this is what he wants, and to get his consent.
Get his final consent.
And Harvey says, I'm ready to go. I need this to be over today. But he also expressed concern for his family and how they were going to cope.
Yeah. Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also had this really kind of profound reflection on what might happen after death.
Yeah. What comes next?
Yeah. And he said, I do not believe this is the end. It just can't be.
Wow.
So even though he didn't necessarily subscribe to any particular religion, it seemed like he had a sense of
hope.
Yeah, like hope, and that there was going to be something beyond this life.
Right, some kind of continuation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dr. Green then explained the entire process of what was going to happen to Harvey's family.
Right.
She went through each medication in detail.
Like a rundown of exactly.
Yeah, so she talked about
what to expect.
The anti-anxiety medication, the local anesthetic, the medication to induce a coma, and the muscle relaxation.
So she gave them a preview of what they would see.
Exactly. And she also explained, the physical changes that they might see.
Right.
So things like changes in breathing, paling of the skin, snoring, and that his mouth might open.
So really practical information.
And she really emphasized that if at any point they felt uncomfortable, they could just step back.
Take a break.
Yeah.
Step away.
So really just wanting to support them.
Trying to minimize any distress or unexpected reaction.
Exactly. Yeah. So during the procedure itself, Harvey's children were holding him. He was looking at his wife.
Yeah.
And they were saying their final goodbyes.
Yeah.
And Norma's last words to Harvey as he was drifting off to sleep were, "See ya later."
Wow.
And then Harvey actually started snoring after he received the first medication.
So just a sign of relaxation.
Yeah. And then Dr. Green administered the rest of the medications. And there was a moment where she kind of panicked a little bit. Because the final medication wasn't flowing smoothly.
Yeah.
And it turned out that Harvey's circulation had already started to slow down.
Oh, okay.
So she then confirmed his death. And what's really remarkable is that the family was immediately just so grateful.
Wow.
To Dr. Green. And I think that really speaks to the sense of peace and closure that this provided for Harvey and for his family.
And it's interesting because amidst the sadness of the situation, there must have also been a sense of relief.
Yeah.
That he wasn't suffering anymore.
Yeah. And that it happened on his own terms.
Yeah.
So Dr. Green's practice in assisted dying grew, as you can imagine, as word got out.
Yeah.
And she shares another story of a woman named Edna, who was 77 years old. And she had a condition called multiple system atrophy.
Okay.
And this is a
Now, how did Dr. Green first hear about Edna?
So Edna was actually communicating with her palliative care physician through a whiteboard.
Oh, wow.
Because she was having trouble speaking.
Okay.
And she wrote DIE.
Wow.
And then later,
yeah,
she wrote DIEPLS.
So she was
exclamation point.
Pretty clear about what she wanted.
Yeah, no ambiguity there.
No.
So Edna had had a really amazing life.
Okay.
She was a pioneer in biology. She was a teacher.
Wow.
Then a principal.
Okay.
And then a superintendent.
So she was a high achiever.
Yeah, really driven and accomplished.
And clearly someone who had a lot of control in her life.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so as her illness progressed, she became unable to walk or talk. She was completely dependent on others for care.
Okay.
And she was having a lot of trouble swallowing. And she was really clear that she did not want a feeding tube.
Wow.
She didn't want to prolong her life
Yeah.
in that state.
She didn't want to.
And she also did not want to die
Starve to death.
of starvation.
Yeah.
So again, that desire for control.
Yeah, for sure.
But Edna's family was
not all on board.
On the same page.
Yeah. So what happened?
Particularly her brother.
Okay.
Who was very religious and very opposed to assisted dying.
Mm-hmm.
He actually...
Did he try to...
A family gathering...
Intervene or something?
Was canceled because of this.
Okay.
And he said that Edna's mind had been poisoned.
Yeah.
And that he would not attend her murder.
Oh, my goodness.
So really strong feelings and strong words. So Dr. Green also had to deal with Edna's nephew, who was also very upset.
Mm-hmm.
And he was threatening to call the police to try to prevent the procedure.
Really?
Yeah. And Dr. Green was very calm.
Handle that.
But very firm.
Yeah.
And she said, this decision is Edna's and Edna's alone.
Mm.
And she also told him that, if he interfered with Edna's legal right to have this procedure, that the police would probably
escort him
out.
Yeah.
So in a kind of unusual turn of events, Dr. Green actually ended up being alone for Edna's procedure.
Really?
Because the nurse,
what happened?
Who was supposed to assist her,
Yeah.
had a last-minute scheduling conflict.
Oh, wow.
But Edna was still able to communicate.
But she still wanted to go ahead with it.
Oh, yeah. She was very clear that she still wanted to go ahead.
Wow.
And she was able to communicate that non-verbally through hand squeezes.
Through hand squeezes. Okay, so they had that.
They had that established and that communication. So Dr. Green talks about how upsetting it was to be accused of murder and how important it was to remember that she was supporting Edna's.
Upholding her wishes, her free will.
Yeah. And she admits that she was actually a little bit worried that a complaint might be filed with a licensing body.
What college?
Yeah, but ultimately none was.
Oh, good.
And the point is that Edna died with dignity.
Yeah.
And with the knowledge
that Edna with agency.
This is what she wanted.
She had made the decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these two stories of Harvey and Edna,
very different,
really highlight the range of experiences that are involved in assisted dying.
Absolutely.
And Harvey's death was very peaceful. Mm-hmm. He was surrounded by his family.
Yeah.
Edna's death.
A lot of family support. Edna's death was a little bit more.
Edna's death happened amidst this family conflict.
Yeah.
But she was still very clear in what she wanted.
But she was the one who, driving that bus.
Yeah. And both stories, I think, really emphasize the complexity,
the emotional weight,
the ethical consideration
of this, and that it's not only about the medical expertise, but it's also about the compassion
and the communication.
So our goal today has been to
give you a glimpse into
to provide a better understanding of this really evolving area of healthcare,
a new frontier.
Yeah, and so as you consider these two stories, and these two very different experiences,
very different.
What do you think it says about individual autonomy and
the role of the family?
The family's role, and also just societal views on end-of-life choices.
What a heavy topic.
Yeah, it is. Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.